morning, everybody. So at ABNY, we like spinach. And charter revision is just that. It is good for you, it is important, and at the same time, it may not be the first thing you reach for. Look, as you know, the charter is the framework for how we operate the city, and we have a group of deeply dedicated and inspiring public figure servants here today to discuss the proposed changes to the charter. I want to thank the Citizens Union and its Executive Director, Betsy Gottbaum, who will be here in a little bit, for co-hosting this event with us. So we have the perfect group of people to discuss charter revision with us today. The 2019 Charter Revision Commission Chair, Gail Benjamin, and her fellow Commissioner, Carl Weisbrod. Gail and Carl are truly two New York institutions. I'll let our moderator give them proper introductions, but I just want to thank them on behalf of the civic community for all they've done. To Gail for helping guide our city through truly decades of transformative land use and zoning decisions. And to Carl, I want to say, who is co-chairing ABNY's push to get New Yorkers fairly counted in the census and the coming 2020 census. I'll say something about Carl, like every time I see him, I marvel at his selfless commitment to the city. You cannot fake the kind of dedication and passion he has for the city, and so I want to thank you both. Now it's my honor to introduce our moderator, Jennifer Austin Jones. So she's the kind of person that as a New Yorker you can take pride in. She is the CEO and Executive Director of the Federation for Protestant Welfare Agencies, and in that role she is a tireless advocate for families and children, promoting social equality and helping communities in need. She is a leukemia survivor. She is an attorney. She is the mother of two. She is the author of the recently published book, Consider It Pure Joy. On 9/11, and I think many of you know this story, 6 months pregnant, and at the time, with her 3-year-old daughter, she came out of the subway in Lower Manhattan to find that one of the towers had fallen. As the second tower fell, she walked her daughter over the Brooklyn Bridge to safety, singing Jesus Loves Me to distract her daughter from what was happening. Many of us here are old enough to remember that day, and thinking about her strength and heroism both on that day and after truly leaves me in awe. She serves on the boards of the National Action Network, the New York Blood Center, the New York Board of Corrections, and the Fund for Public Housing, to name a few. As ABNY, we're very proud to have her on our Census Committee. And ladies and gentlemen, Jennifer Austin Jones.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. Good morning to everyone. I'm judging that by the fact that we are all here at 8:30 a.m. that we like spinach. Maybe. So let's get right to it. As stated on the Charter Revision Commission's website, charter2019.nyc, the New York City Charter, established by the state legislature in 1897, is the city's constitution, creating the framework for our government. The Charter controls how the city spends our tax dollars, how decisions are made about changes to our neighborhoods, and the powers of our elected officials. 30 long years ago, the Charter Revision Commission overhauled the city's government. Last year, in 2018, a newly appointed commission set out to do the same. Examine the charter and what and how city government functions pursuant to it, and then, with the input of New Yorkers, determine what and how it should be revised to better align our government with our city today and for the foreseeable future. The outcome of their work: a set of proposed amendments to the charter in 5 ballot questions to be voted upon by New York City registered voters on our next election day, this coming November 5th, now less than 6 weeks away. This morning, we've gathered to learn more about the Commission's proposed amendments and to hopefully have some of your questions answered as you prepare, and as you prepare others, to go to the polls November 5th and help decide our city's course and direction, probably for the next several decades. We're honored to have as our leaders and guides of this conversation 2 individuals, as Stephen said, arguably, two people who know the ins and outs of New York City government better than anybody, well, certainly most. 2 people who served on the commission for the year and whose service to New York City has spanned the years. Their brief bios, are in the program for you. So I won't read them, but I'll quickly say that Gail Benjamin has served as the Charter Revision Commission Chair. She worked on land use matters for 36 years before retiring, was the director of the New York City Council Land Use Division for 25 years, providing advice, analysis, and expertise to the Speaker of the Council, the chairs of the Land Use Committee and Subcommittee, and the 51 members of the Council. And perhaps my favorite New Yorker, Carl Weisbrod, everybody's favorite New Yorker.
Favorite moderator, for sure.
And friend, and I'm really honored to call him friend. Also a Charter Revision Commissioner, Carl Weisbrod, currently Senior Advisor at HRNA, and recently he served as chairman of the New York City Planning Commission and Director of the New York City Department of Planning. Again, I encourage you to read their bios, and they're just snapshots. We could probably spend the hour talking about the great work that they've done for the city of New York. We don't have the time to do so. If we did, it would not be repetitive. You would not be bored, I'm sure of that. But we need to get to the matter at hand, so we're going to jump right to it. First, what will happen is the Chair Benjamin, will give us an overview of the Commission and the Commission's work. Following her presentation, I will ask a few questions of Chair Benjamin and Commissioner Weisbrod, and then we're going to take some time to answer some of your questions. So we're going to get right to it. Good deal? Good deal. Chair Benjamin?
Hi, thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction. Probably better than I deserve, but certainly not better than Carl deserves.
Give me a break. Okay.
We're here today to talk about the Charter Revision Commission, both its work and what will be presented to you on the ballot on November 5th, 2019. It will be presented to you as 5 questions. It will be on one side of the ballot, and it will be in 7.5 font. So all of you bring your glasses on election day because the print is going to be pretty small. As most of you know, last spring the City Council adopted a piece of legislation, Local Law 90, at the request of the Manhattan Borough President, the Public Advocate, and the Speaker of the City Council, to create a new Charter Revision Commission to do a thorough top-to-bottom review of the Charter for really the first time since 1989. In 1989, as you may recall, the Supreme Court determined that the voting structure of the Board of Estimate, which I in fact voted on then, was illegal. And the challenge for the Charter Revision Commission of '89 started with the fact for how to redistribute the power and work that had been done by the Board of Estimate, which was representative of the 5 boroughs and the controller, the mayor, and at that time, the council president. They did a magnificent job. I think we can all agree with what they knew then and what they could foresee then in redistributing how government worked in the city. During that process, the city council, which had before that been a fairly powerless body, received the powers of land use and enhanced budget powers, and the mayor received much of the other powers that the Board of Estimate had enjoyed. And we wanted to take a look at how that was working after 30 years and after changes that were not foreseen. What was not foreseen, one of the big ones was term limits, and how term limits would affect the balance of power between the different elected officials who represent the city. It did not foresee that the city would continue to grow and would put pressure on different parts of the city and in different ways. It did not foresee that the population would change in terms of the diversity and what that would mean for what city agencies were doing and the work that they might need to be able to do. So the City Council adopted a piece of legislation, the first of its kind, that not only created a charter commission, but required representation from each one of the borough presidents, from the public advocate, from the city council, and from the mayor, so that all of the elected officials, save the DAs, would be elected and would be able to be involved in the process of forming the new city charter. Each one of those entities, the mayor appointed 4 people, including Carl. The city council appointed 4 people, including myself as the chair. The borough president, the public advocate, and the comptroller each appointed 1 person. We met for the first time in July of 1989.
2018.
Oh, yes, it was
not
a
that old.
long, it was a long process. Of 2018, we established rules for how we would do business and some overriding principles that we, as a body, we would only consider proposals that could not be done by legislation of the council or rule of the mayor, because those aren't really charter questions. That, in my opinion, is about having the political will to do it, not about whether it can be done. And all the commissioners basically agreed to that being the parameter of things we would examine. We put forth a schedule, we hired staff, all the normal things, and we started with hearings around the city to hear what the public thought. At the same time, we also sent letters to all of the commissioners asking for their input on what they thought worked with regards to the business that their agency was doing and what would make the business of the city more streamlined, more efficient, more fair. We contacted the city council members and the other elected officials and asked them the same questions. And we did get a fairly robust response. We also asked all the commissioners. There's a reason they were appointed. We met with all of the commissioners individually to get their viewpoints on what they thought we should be looking at in the charter. That process took us through the summer and the early part of the fall, and resulted in over 1,000 separate suggestions or proposals, some more advanced than others in their thinking. And we put all of them on our website so that the world would be able to see them and comment on them. And we asked people to comment on what they thought, what they saw, how it worked. And staff went to work on reviewing them and culling them. In the late fall, the commission got together to adopt a set of guidelines by which the staff should examine these proposals, because 1,000 proposals could not possibly be voted on, be reviewed adequately, and some of them really weren't either subject to the first 2 or just weren't workable things that the city could do. We adopted a set of 5 criteria, the commissioners, by which the staff would examine each proposal, and if it didn't meet the 5, it would be eliminated at that stage. And then we posted those lists on our website again. We had a public meeting at which we then adopted a revised set of proposals based on what had been winnowed down. And if I recall, there were 45 or so that were still in after that review. The staff then did several things. They did a revised, really deep dive set of research, including both book research, legal research, and practical research, talking to and reviewing what other municipalities, localities, and states did. And they put together for us a set of expert panels on many of the topics that were the subject of those 44 remaining proposals. We spent 6 days, 5 hours maybe, with these expert panels and getting information from them about the proposals, about other ways in which cities choose to do this, or states. And I found that very informative. I think Carl did also. Let me just see how much. Okay. I'm going to race through the next few months. I have about 4 minutes left. After we did the expert testimony, we had a series of discussions and public hearings on that revised list. And then we had a series of public discussions amongst the commissioners. Many times that is not something that is done in public. Despite there was consternation on the commission about how we could meet in smaller groups out of the public eye to kind of refine what we were really thinking in some more private way. And our general counsel and corporation counsel and COIB were adamant that we could not. That any way we devised that meeting, if its purpose was to avoid the open meetings law, we in fact were in violation of the open meetings law, even if there wasn't a majority of us present. So we did take the extraordinary step of only meeting to discuss in public. And we had some really interesting conversations. I remember a particular one in Staten Island that went on for quite a while. I'm very proud of the fact that we managed to do that. We were all a little nervous at first about giving our opinions or concerns in public in front of the public, but it did work. Finally, in July, the end of June, beginning of July, the staff put forth the staff proposals, which were 21, I believe, separate questions. We publicized that. We had public hearings on that. We did nothing except have public hearings, it seems, some days. And finally, in July, we adopted a final set of proposals, which were 19, that would go forward to the ballot. After those were adopted, most by unanimous vote, some not, we submitted them to both Corporation Counsel and to the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections last week, as I said, voted on the format and decided that they could fit it on one page in a 7.5 font. The print is what's required by the Board of Elections and the state. You don't get a choice about what the print will look like. And we are now trying to publicize. This is a hard election year because there aren't citywide, statewide, federal elections that are going to be on this ballot. So it's up to us and hopefully all of you to try and encourage your neighbors, your friends, your family to take a look at the ballot questions and to come out and vote. Because the only thing on the ballot this year is the public advocate, Jumaane Williams. I think it's a great job, but I think that people feel like they just voted for him. There will be the Queens DA race in Queens, and the state just voted to approve additional judgeships for each borough so that there will be a few judges on the ballot, which isn't usually a big hit in terms of bringing people out to vote. So I have 2 seconds left. I've fulfilled my... What did we do before these?
I love it.
But again, I think this was a fascinating experiment. I hope that the public will endorse what we've done. I think what we've done is important. I think that what we've done will redound to the credit of each one of the citizens of the city, and will help organize and stabilize the city going forward for the next 30 years until there's another major charter commission. That's my 10.
Excellent. Well, let's have a conversation. So don't want to spend too much time here, but you did say something that I'm now curious about. So 45 proposals, winnowed down to 19. 5 criteria applied in making the decisions. Clearly a very distinguished commission that was put to this task, and so not really questioning, well, why is only 19 or how'd you get there? But I am curious as to whether or not the information is available. Is it public information that others can see if they so desire, and where can they go and see what these other proposals were?
Yes, they're all on our website. You can also read it in, I believe, 26 languages. It's www.charter2019.nyc, and it outlines and has in detail all the things we've done, all the documents we received, the process and the transcripts for everything that we've done. You can also stream all of the public hearings that we had. You can watch them yourself. And you can read all the documents that the commissioners received and saw.
Excellent. So the ballot questions that have now been presented center on 5 topics: elections, city budget, land use review and related procedures. Let's see, what else? Ethics and governance, and the Civilian Complaint Review Board. And I imagine that everybody who is here has had an opportunity, has taken the time to review the proposals. And I'm sure that many of you, like me, when reading them, sensed that there was a theme that was kind of running through all of these questions, that permeated these questions. I picked up questions about distribution of power, controlling against corruption, and fraud. And again, concerns about, balance of power, checks and balances. Would you speak to the drivers, like in your thinking, your process, your decision making? Did we pick up on the theme, or did I? Is there more to it?
I can start first and then Carl, because I don't think,
Because I'm living in this world right now at the federal, yeah.
with 15 different commissioners coming from 15 different places, we're not always in perfect alignment. In fact, frequently, we're not in perfect alignment. I certainly wanted to take a look, and yes, one of my themes was, is the balance of power right? That in 1989, when that charter revision occurred, we had a mayor who had been mayor for 3 terms and may well have been mayor for a lot longer. And then after charter revision, the unthinkable happened, and the mayor lost the primary. David Dinkins became mayor. That was not an expectation of the 1989 Charter Revision Commission. They thought that the mayor would give the city stability through this process by being Ed Koch. But one of the major changes was term limits. And I believe that, having worked at the council in particular, that term limits of the council led to a body that could not easily be an effective balance against the mayor. Mm-hmm. And that we already have a strong mayoral system, that it's important and significant, therefore, to spread power out a little so that other voices can be heard. And that was a theme we did hear, not just in the Charter Revision Commission, but over the past number of years when people have felt that one mayor or another had too much power and was not adequately listening to the public or the other electeds. So that was a concern of mine, and you can see that reflected in both the question of election. I think that was on people's minds with the election reform. I think it was on their minds with some of the reforms in governance, of adding additional voices to the CCRB, of adding additional voices to COIB, which is the check on kind of improper abuse or improper/abuse of government by government officials. So yes, I would say you definitely got that right from me. I think Carl may.
Yeah, I just like to go back to and underscore something that Gail said. And first of all, I want to. This is a unique commission in 2 ways. One, it is the first charter commission, I think, in history that has not been created by the mayor. That was created by the council, Speaker of the Council. That was unprecedented. And of course, the second thing that is unprecedented is that all prior commissions, including the revered 1989 commission, all the appointees were appointees of the mayor, and consequently, not only was the commission appointed by the mayor, but controlled by the mayor. And Here, the council created this commission, Speaker and the council legislation created this commission, but, and this is, I think, a real tribute to the Speaker Johnson, it didn't control this commission. And no entity in the government, no appointer had a controlling interest in this commission. So it was sort of wide open. And I do think that the fundamental question before the commission was, fundamentally, is the balance of power between the executive branch and the legislative branch correct? And as someone, I do work with cities all over the world, and I'm grateful for the fact that New York has a very strong mayor system with a very strong executive. I don't think the city could function if it didn't. That is not true of most other cities in the world, and they suffer, in my view, because of it. When Gail speaks of the 45 or so, or even 1,000 proposals that came before this commission, a lot of them would have radically altered that balance of power. And I think the proposals that you see before you are, in some respects, a tweaking of that balance of power, but not really a fundamental change in that balance of power. And to me, that's really important. And as Gail said, I don't think there were some items here that not everyone agreed on, partly on these grounds. But I think everyone came away from it with a sense that it was a fair outcome. And I think the ones that really tweaked the balance of power a little bit were in the areas of budgeting, which for the first time give other elected officials some protections against their budgets being slashed in a political rather than financial way because of hostility from powers that be that can do that, to the advice and consent now for the future corporation councils, because the corporation council represents not only the mayor, in fact, doesn't represent the mayor, the corporation council represents the city. And so it is, even though personally I had my own reservations about this, I think that it's not unreasonable to subject the Corporation Council to the advice and consent of the council. And I think those are the areas. And in the area of budgeting, again, as Gail indicated, there was some concerns about vindictive activities that had happened in the past.
Okay.
To be honest, in the Giuliani administration 25 years ago, where
It's not
the
quite
mayor,
that long ago, but I'll accept you.
well, 20 years ago, or anyway, and I think a concern about the mayor using the budget power vindictively, and this was some of the tweaks that are before the voters now, are an effort to redress that possibility without fundamentally damaging the power of the executive to determine what the overall size of the budget should be, what the revenue estimates are, without changing the council's role in appropriations. So I think on balance, these were tweaks, but the underlying theme of many of these issues were, as you said, Jennifer, what is the proper balance between
And we
the
also
executive
saw
and
it
the
with the recommendations concerning the Civilian Complaint Review Board. We see it there. That's not city council per se, except for maybe looking at some of the appointments. But one of the things that jumped out at me was the proposals around the decisions made by the police commissioner. And I'll just put it out here, for me, that drew my attention, over the course of the summer, given what was happening in New York City at the time with the pending decision concerning Officer Pantaleo. Were you, in making recommendations and proposals concerning the CCRB, were the issues of the day like front and center? Were you looking at issues in the present and issues over time? Tell us about that.
We were looking at issues over time, and in fact, by the time we voted
Had
Pantaleo's,
not yet.
okay, if I lean down, I can do this, but when I speak out, can you hear me? Officer Pantaleo had not yet, the police, the
The decision.
adjudicatory process had not yet finished when we voted, which was in July. But it was one of the issues that had the most passion and probably the most organized advocacy. But the issue was not just on the CCRB. It started out as a broader issue that people felt strongly about on police accountability. How do we assure the public that the police are accountable, not just to the mayor, but for their behavior when they're outside? As a child of a police officer, this is an issue close to my heart. I don't believe that the majority of police officers are bad people or set out in the morning to do bad things. But bad things do sometimes happen. Or people believe that bad things have happened. And then in 1990-something, the city council established the CCRB to deal with those issues along with the traditional issues, which is IAB and the court system.
Mm-hmm.
There was a report earlier in the year, there were 2 reports over the summer about how that system was working. And in fact, Commissioner Dashi, who is the head of CCR, the executive director of CCRB, came to our hearing and came to our expert panel to testify about the impediments he believed to them being able to do the job they would like to do and to assure the public that when complaints were brought, they could be fully investigated. One, of course, was the budget, that they have a very small budget compared to 37,000 uniformed officers. So that was an issue we have addressed in the final report. They were concerned, one of the issues that concerned them, which we are addressing, is that right now, in order to get a subpoena, in order to, particularly in this day and age, to get information and video from body cameras or other cameras, the commission, the CCRB has to meet, and a majority of them have to vote on that subpoena. The commissioner expressed the fact that this was a deterrent to being able to get timely information, because frequently by the time the commission could meet and do that, the board, by the time they could meet and do that, the video was already overwritten so that it didn't exist anymore. So we have proposed giving the commissioner the ability to, giving the board the ability to delegate to the commission, the commissioner, the subpoena power. It's not widespread, but it allows them to react in a more quick manner to preserve evidence that may be useful in reviewing the complaints that somebody has issued. One of the areas that was most sensitive was the issue of false statements. Obviously, this is a big issue in any board where you're investigating something, but it was raised time and time again that false statements may be made that prevent the actual and fair investigation of the allegations, and that there was nothing CCRB could do other than turn their suspicions over to the police department for further review, because CCRB could only review FATO complaints, which are accusation, it doesn't really matter, but that was not something they could review. So we're proposing to give them the power to investigate and recommend discipline for those times when a material misstatement has been made by an officer who was the subject of the investigation. So we have pared it down. There was a fear that it would bring in all sorts of people, but we've pared it down to a material statement by the officer who was under investigation. And I think that was a really big, and I think that will have implications and will have resonance, if adopted, way into the future. Because the experience that CCRB had is when they turned over these suspicions of misleading statements, to say the least, it was in less than 2% of the cases that the department ever did anything with them. So,
I would just add that by far that was the most heated issue that came before the commission. I guess land use, which we felt was too complicated and inappropriate in many ways to deal with in the charter, was another probably secondary issue. But the CCRB issues, partly because of the backdrop of Pantaleo and Eric Garner and started with, I would say, two quite extreme or widely different viewpoints among people who were arguing that the CCRB itself should be an elected body with an elected prosecutor, and I think there was a broad sense on the commission that be careful what you wish for, because we've seen what happens with elections even for civilian complaint review boards. And another extreme from that nothing should change here. If, in fact, the powers of the CCRB should be even further curtailed. And I think that was by far the most heated issue we dealt with. But I do think, and I don't want to not go any further without noting that, at least in my view, the most consequential recommendation that the charter has come up with is ranked choice voting, and that will
Glad to ask about that because
change if adopted by the voters, which personally I hope it will be.
So talk
will
about that.
fundamentally, in my view, change the way we go about electing our local representatives.
Can you begin by just explaining it, like how it would play out?
okay. In ranked choice, well, I don't think there's anyone here who's old enough to remember that the city did do ranked choice voting. Years ago, when I was but a girl, we had something called community school boards, and we had ranked choice voting for those, as we did for the anti-poverty boards. And for those who are even older than I am, in the 1940s, we actually had ranked choice voting for city council. But since then, we have not done it. What it is, essentially, is you go to your polling place, as you do now, and you will see names on the ballot, and you, instead of just filling in one box, I vote for this person as my only choice, winner take all, you can fill in up to 5 boxes for each candidate, for each office, and you fill them out in rank order. So you could say, I want Carl Weisbrod as my number 1, and I want Gail Benjamin as my number 2, and I want Travis as my number 3, and all the way down to 5. Now, you don't have to fill out 5. You can just fill out 1 and walk away. But you have the option to fill out up to 5 in a rank order. And then when the ballots are all, and you leave no matter how many you vote for. After the ballots are all collected, in this system, the person who receives the least number of votes.
First place.
What?
First place votes, right? Yeah.
Yeah, the least number of first place votes is eliminated. And their votes are redistributed.
Person who
second
receives
place.
the least number of first place votes.
Their votes are then redistributed to their second, whoever was the second person on each one of those ballots. Now, of course, if someone gets to 50% on the first ballot, it's over.
So what's the value add of this?
There are a couple of value addeds. One is that we have seen increasingly runoff elections where people are elected by very small minorities, and which get smaller as we have more runoffs. So for instance, in the runoff earlier this year for the public advocate position, 61% of the people who voted in the first runoff, in the first election for the public advocate, did not return for the runoff. So in the actual election, there were about 500,000 votes cast, which is incredibly small to start with. And then in the runoff, there were 200 and something. So very few people are therefore electing in these situations of runoffs and specials. Very few people are electing the person who was elected.
At an incredible cost to do a
Yes.
runoff.
That election alone was $16 million, the runoff.
So this would control against having to spend money on a runoff.
That is correct, and would also ensure that that original 500,000 or however many people chose to vote would be determining who the actual winner of the election was. Number two, a lot of small party candidates, like the Green Party, and elsewhere in the city, the Republican Party, said that in these elections, many times people might like their candidates but didn't want to, quote, throw their vote away. And that if you liked the Green Party candidate, you looked at it and said, yeah, right, like they're going to get elected. This would allow you that choice to vote for the Green Party candidate as your number one. And then if you think they're not going to win, to vote for whoever else you want as your number 2, 3, and 4. But would mean more people might take a chance, because then they wouldn't feel like they were just throwing their vote away, even if their candidate got 40%. So that was of great importance. The part that went with it that we did not adopt, but which a number of our board members really liked, was nonpartisan voting. That you would not any longer run as a Democrat or a Republican, but that was on the ballot before and lost. So we were not, at this point, willing to spend a lot of time and energy trying to relitigate.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Right.
So we're
So
going
as a consequence, ranked choice voting applies only in primaries and special elections, not in general elections, for that very reason.
Good deal. We're going to turn to questions, and as we gear up for questions, just very quickly, come November 5th, you have to vote for them all.
You can
vote for
vote.
one,
There
or
are
how does that
5.
work?
All of these are the
stand
19
alone?
proposals are adopted, are separated into 5 questions. I certainly recommend that you vote for each one of those 5. But you can review the 5 questions. We have a lot of information on our website and the
So
research.
if you vote for one question, so each one can stand on its own?
Yes.
Each ballot question can stand on its own?
Yes.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Questions? Yes.
Okay, I just want to touch very, very briefly on the land use. The first land use decision of, number one, why did you decide that the community boards needed to see the application before it was certified, number one? And number two, we know that there often is an extended DCP review of applications, and will this extend it even more? But maybe my why is more important.
Yeah, so I think we had a lot, as I indicated, a lot of questions about the land use process and how it worked. I think the two items that we did approve were intended to bring a degree of increased transparency without undermining the certainty that EULA provides. And so the first item, which is, and there are two items. One is that the charter recommendation is that the planning department would, within 30 days of, or no less than 30 days of certifying an application, would send the fundamentals of what that proposal is to the borough president and the local community board so that they would know what was coming. It's not intended to start a pre-ULURP in any way or have a back and forth. It's only intended as essentially as a notice provision that this is going to be coming for certification within 30 days. Frankly, in almost every situation that the city planning department is responsible for, that happens anyway as a matter of course. I think this is really intended largely so that private applications are also, small private applications are become, community boards and borough presidents become aware of them. And then the second provision, which is also really codifies existing practice, is that if an item is certified at the beginning of the summer, community board has an additional 30 days to review it because the community boards frequently don't meet in August. And so again, planning department, I can tell you from my own experience, has pretty much been pretty careful about not certifying applications in any event in recognition of the community board schedule. So that also is sort of a codification.
Good deal. Yes.
Hi, I have two questions sort of about the diffusion of power that you all have been trying to work on with the commission.
Speak up a little bit.
Sure. So I have two questions about the diffusion of power that you all have been working on as part of the commission. First, do you think, or rather, what's the rationale behind giving the public advocate, the power to appoint certain board positions? I know that the public advocate position has been, it's an ombudsperson's role, sort of in its most basic role. And do you see sort of a conflict between steering nominees toward, certain commissions and boards, and then also being able to sort of speak openly on what the government actually does? And two, given that the borough president's roles and the public advocate's roles have come under question as to what purpose they serve in, a post-Board of Estimate world, was there any concern expressed about fixing a budget for those roles as, share the city budget going forward?
I would say there was certainly concern on every side expressed about the role of elected officials other than the mayor and the city council. We heard everything from the public advocate and the borough president should be eliminated to they should be strengthened and supported, and they should have a bigger role, permanent role in the permanent government. I think we ended up agnostic, except to the extent we believe there should be a structure that represents views other than the mayor. And we believe that was the intent of the '89 charter, and we wanted to continue that. And so we looked to ways that we could strengthen other elected officials to allow them to more independently do their job and to represent different views. And that is why we decided to add different representatives to COIB and to the CCRB, and why we decided that independent budgets would be an appropriate way that these independently elected officials were not under the thumb, so to speak, of the mayor in budgeting that could affect other decisions or affect the independence of the elected official in their pronouncements, their decisions, their thinking about projects or things that might come before them. I hope that answers. So we were conscious of it, and we did hear that these offices should be eliminated. We just didn't agree.
I have a question for Mr. Weisbrod. Could you expand upon your comment earlier that land use was too complicated an issue to deal with more in depth during the commission?
I will start, and I think Gail can certainly weigh in this a lot. From her experience at the city council, I think our sense, we heard a lot about land use from all sides, and we all know it's a highly controversial issue and a hot issue in the city. I think our general sense is that it is an issue that we didn't hear a whole lot about, that ULURP should, which is the essence of what the charter recommends on land use, should be changed. We did hear a lot about planning, and I think our sense was that this is something that can, just going back to one of the principles that Gail as chair established at the beginning and the entire commission embraced, that this is something that is much better dealt with by the legislature, the mayor, and the council working together to try to come up with a better, a more rational approach to planning, or make changes in the way we do planning to some extent. I have my very strong views on this, and others have different views on this, but I think we generally agree that that should be addressed through legislation rather than through the charter.
Got it. I'm going to move on.
Yes. Besides a very interesting and slightly controversial ranked choice voting, I think that the proposals are, frankly, sort of motherhood and apple pie. I think they're all very good proposals. My concern is that you didn't address a problem that came from the mayor's charter revision commission, and that's about term limits. And term limits came about because of a petulant loser in the mayoral race a quarter century ago.
Mr. Poe.
And I actually agree with term limits for the executive, the president, the governor, or the mayor. But at the city council level, I think that's a real problem, because it takes a strong mayor, it makes him even stronger. But also now, the most recent thing is limiting the terms of community board members. And full disclosure, I am a community board member. And I would gladly resign if it would reverse this process. Because I know in my community board, we have a natural 30–40% turnover every year. And we have term limits on our officers. And we are all appointed by our city council, or his recommendation to the borough president. So there's a great opportunity for turnover that way. My real concern is losing the institutional knowledge. I know people who were on my board who knew what that developer did 18 years ago. I didn't even know that that issue ever existed. That institutional knowledge will be lost. And I thought that this opportunity coming from the city council would have been a great one to address the issue of term limits at the legislative and community board level.
Your response.
As we said from the beginning, one of the principles that we established at the beginning was that if it could be done by legislation, it would not be done by charter revision. That is a political issue. And clearly, term limits on the part of the executives or the city council can be done by the city council, because they've done it several times. They've changed it from 2 terms to 3 terms, back to 2 terms. They've changed the definition of the terms. And one of the other principles we established was that if it was done in last year's, if it was voted on by the public last year, we would not change that. We would not alter the public approval process. Do I think that term limits for community boards is a good idea? No. And I voted against it. And I campaigned against it. But the public decided that they thought this was a great idea, so it was adopted. And it will take the public to decide that the impact of it makes community boards less powerful, less able to do the work that they are asked to do, and to demand a change.
Thank you so much. I have a question, and forgive me if I actually don't know if it was one of the proposed items, but was there any discussion around having non-citizens be able to vote in general, but specifically around the charter revisions? Because I can imagine that things like ULURP and city budget affect people outside this registered.
I believe that that was one of the 1,000 proposals that we started with, but it did not reach a large number. I can get back to you about why it got eliminated at the beginning. I'm not sure that we in the city have the power to do that. We may have the power to do it for certain elections and not others, but I can get back to you, or you can look on the website and it'll tell you what happened to that idea. That's city, that's Charter Revision 219.nyc.
I just want to, just Gail alluded to this, but just make clear, which I think everyone here is aware of, that while we were unconstrained in how we address charter issues, the charter itself is constrained by state law. So there are a lot of things that we would have liked to address, but couldn't address because of state law, and certain things that we address in a highly sensitive manner that we all sort of think is a good idea, but is constrained by state law, the rainy day fund for the budget being one of them.
All right, so we've got one more question. I'm going to try to get some balance in the room. Anybody over here? There you
Can you
go.
speak a little bit more about the budget proposal and specifically the advantage of having the revenue estimates come in earlier?
I can. It's not my greatest area of expertise. But one of the issues that the council and the mayor have wrestled with over the course of time is the fact that the revenue estimate comes in so late. And since the budget has to be balanced, you're working against a kind of, at times, invisible target. And then what has happened traditionally is somewhere in the future, after the budget is adopted, money is modded in, which is not the best way to do the budget. You have probably all, you may recall that usually sometime in June, the mayor says, oh, tax revenues are up and we see an additional $1 billion, but it's not reflected in the budget. So it was important to the council and other budgetary agencies that process was meant to begin earlier in the real discussion. And so we just moved up the date, not how the mayor does it, but we moved up the date to coincide with the actual budgeting dates, so everybody's working with the same set of facts, since the council in the budgeting process cannot allocate more money than the revenue.
Thank you. We are out of time.
Can I just say one
Sure.
final, this is my little pitch to all of you, which is there was some discussion about ranked choice voting, and I think it's the most consequential thing on this ballot. You heard from Gail some of the reasons why we think it's a good idea. I also think it offers the opportunity to have a much more civilized discussion during elections, because candidates will not only have to think about bringing their own voters out, but being a little careful about antagonizing the voters that might support others. And
Because they need their twos and
they
threes.
need their twos and threes. And so I think for New York, this it offers an opportunity to get more indifferent candidates, more varied candidates, more demographically diverse candidates, a more civilized debate, And in cities that have, and states that have adopted this, it has worked extremely, extremely well. Voters understand it, voters have used it, and voters are satisfied with it. We did, on the staff, I really commend Gail and the staff for a really hard look at how this is working all over the country. And just about invariably, it has worked extremely, extremely well. So
Other
I think it's going to,
jurisdictions, can you give
seems more
us
complicated than it is.
other jurisdictions, like other states?
The state of
San
Maine,
Francisco, Maine.
the whole state, on
right.
national elections as well as state and local elections.
Excellent. Okay. So we're out of time. We really thank the two of you for the work that you've done over the course of the last now year and a half or so, and for taking time this morning to make sure that we are the most informed voters possible. I'm going to give you 20 seconds, Gail, to just give us parting words as chair.
My parting words would be, even if you don't like all of the questions, please go out and vote. It matters to the future of the city, even if you just want to vote for one item. Certainly, if you want to vote against one item, I'd be disappointed, but just go out and vote, please. It's important.
Thank you. Thank you all.